Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today I'm going to be discussing the U18 World Juniors and the rising and falling draft stock from some of the top prospects in the entire world. Now with the U18s concluding, we got a great glimpse at some of the top prospects in the 2021, 2022, and even 2023 NHL drafts. But who were the top prospects that rose the most at this event, and which are the prospects that are going to fall the most in draft stock because of this year's U18s? Watch till the end for the entire rankings and all the prospect content, and hit that subscribe button if you're new. 60% of the people watching are not subscribed, so every bit helps, and we make hockey and prospect content just like this one almost every single day. Now, I'm going to be honest here, going into this year's World Juniors, I really didn't expect many players outside of the 2021 draft to make a humongous impact, but man, was I wrong, and especially in the 2022 and 2023 drafts, which we'll get into in a minute, there were so many players that just made incredible progress and incredible impacts that we do need to talk about today. But I'm going to be able to list off 7 risers and 3 fallers from this year's World Juniors, guys that rose and fall according to their performance, and when it comes to their draft stock, could have a major impact on where they go in the future. And the first riser we're going to talk about today is going to end up going to Team Canada centerman Mason McTavish. Now, Mason McTavish has always been an interesting one to me, but both in public opinion and my opinion, I think McTavish definitely rose throughout this tournament. 5 goals, 6 assists for 11 points in 7 games played. Mason McTavish had himself an amazing tournament and was among Team Canada's amazing scorers. Now, when it comes to Mason McTavish, I had some concerns in last year in the OHL about his overall game, but I thought the goal scoring was there, and some of the underlying skill was definitely shining throughout his rookie year. But going into this year and the Swiss League and the World Juniors, I think he's took some major strides in terms of that overall game, the consistency there, which I thought was a big thing, and really just showing those skills that he does have on a consistent basis. McTavish has done that in the Swiss League, and he's doing that now in the World Juniors, and could end up being a top 10 pick at this year's NHL draft. But now we're going to go from the first riser in Mason McTavish to the first faller on today's list. This is a guy that I thought could have been one of the best defensemen of the tournament, and was probably one of the least consistent and least impressive ones of the tournament. We're now going to move on to the Czech Republic's defense and go on to Stanislav Svozil. Now, Stanislav Svozil is an interesting one in terms of public perception because some people see him as a top 15 pick, top 20. I personally have him around the 25 to 31 range still, but Svozil, in terms of the puck movement and the skating, still showed some flashes of what he was made of in the World Juniors. But in terms of overall consistency, in terms of overall impact, especially defensively, Svozil just was not where it needed to be. I thought he could have been one of the best defensemen of the tournament, and he was sadly the exact opposite. I think Svozil will be fine, but I think the public perception might be swayed by a really disappointing tournament, by all means. But now going on from the first faller to the second riser at the U18 World Juniors, we're going to continue the trend of Team Canada representing and go on to number 2 riser at this point and go on to a guy that many have in the second round. Rob McKenzie recently had him in the 44th overall position, but a guy that I've always seen as a top 20 pick. We're going to move on to Logan Stankoven of Team Canada. Now, Logan Stankoven is an interesting one at 5'8". Obviously, the size is going to be a big criticism for a lot of people, but if there's any 5'8" player that I think is going to exceed at the pro level, it's going to be Logan Stankoven. The tenacity he has in his game is absolutely amazing. And when the puck's loose, he's going to end up finding it and getting puck possession back. He's an amazing player in terms of grit and in terms of grind play, but the skill also that he has and the low-key silk that he has too on his mitts is really fantastic for a guy his size too. I think Stankoven has a lot of interesting skill, and I think he will be a very, very good NHL player. And he had 8 points in 7 games in the World Juniors, but I think even deserves some more than that. And the WHL this year, he has 10 points in 6 games played. Stankoven is the real deal in my opinion, and is a guy that should go at least in the first round this year. But now we're going to move on to the second faller at this year's World Juniors, and we're going to go on to the second faller from Team USA's defense in Aidan Hreschuk. Now, Aidan Hreschuk going into this year, last year I had him in the top 15 in a couple of mock drafts and thought he could be a pretty high pick, and he still might be a first rounder, but whenever I watch him this year, I just continually come away disappointed, whether that be in the USDP and especially in this year's World Juniors. 2 assists in 5 games isn't the worst thing in the world. But with Hreschuk, I thought he could have been a big part of this USA defense if they were to go far, and I think he was one of the main reasons why they ended up having a lackluster tournament. Whenever I consistently watch him this year, I just come away disappointed with the lack of really pure skill. I think there's some decent production there that could end up happening, but his defensive awareness is lackluster. His skating, I don't think, is where it needs to be when it comes to his level and when it comes to some of the other prospects that might be out there. I think when it comes to Hreschuk, he's a fine prospect, but definitely a guy that I think is going to be slipping on a lot of draft boards pretty soon. But now we're going to end up moving on to the third riser at this year's World Juniors, and a guy that I think has proved a lot of people wrong so far too, whether that be in a Swedish play or his Team Sweden play as well. We're now going to move on to top forward in the 2021 NHL draft class and go on to Fabian Lysell. Now, Fabian Lysell is another guy that perception-wise, I think sometimes goes underrated, sometimes it goes a little bit overrated, but the raw tools he possesses are super fascinating, and in terms of top-end talent, and in the terms of the two-way game he could have, I think Lysell could be one of the best prospects in this draft. But as a guy that was 12th overall by Bob McKenzie just a couple of weeks back, this is a guy that had a lot to prove, and with Team Sweden, he absolutely proved a lot. In 7 games played, has 3 goals, 6 assists for 9 points, but not even just in terms of the point totals, the overall production and the overall consistency that Lysell had was absolutely stupendous. He was one of Team Sweden's best players throughout the tournament, one was consistent too, and I think it was a big reason why they ended up winning the bronze medal or even being in a position to win the bronze medal. He was fantastic and I think was Team Sweden's best player. But now we're going to end up moving on to the third faller at this year's World Juniors, and a guy that could go as high as the early second round in this year's NHL draft, but I think failed to make an impact, whether that be because of his own play and some unfortunate circumstances, but either way, his consistency was just not there, and he made really no impact whatsoever for Team Finland this year. We're going to move on to Team Finland forward and go on to Oliver Kapanen as the third faller at this year's tournament. Now, Oliver Kapanen had a wacky tournament, 4 games played, 0 points, but was projected to be a big part of Team Finland's team. Had an unfortunate head-first dive into the boards earlier in the tournament, missed some games, was brought back and was healthy to some extent, and that's great to see. But with Oliver Kapanen in the games he did end up playing, I just didn't really see anything from him that warranted that early second round pick. Now, going back to his U20 Liga play, I think there's definitely some good potential there in terms of goal scoring touch and overall good positioning, but I didn't really see that in the World Juniors, and I do think that some of that is due to his own play, but also, again, that injury that he ended up getting. I think Kapanen will still be a decent NHL prospect and will likely still go in the second round or third round, but that's a guy that I think definitely had a potential to maybe solidify himself as a first round pick, and definitely did the exact opposite. But now we're going to end up moving on to the fourth riser at this year's World Juniors, going to another player from Team Canada, continuing the representation, but was a guy that was a middling prospect in terms of the first round, a guy that unfortunately has not been able to play in the OHL this year because the OHL is doing OHL things, but made a huge impact for Team Canada. It was among their best point getters. Going on next up to Francesco Pinelli. Now, Francesco Pinelli ended up having an amazing tournament. 4 goals, 7 assists, 11 points in 7 games played, and was one of the best point getters on Team Canada. And I think you could really see that great offensive instincts really pulling through. The playmaking is also at an elite level, and that continued to shine throughout this year. And I think Pinelli is definitely making an impact in those categories. In terms of the consistency and the overall impact game to game, those are some of my concerns dating back to last year in the OHL. But for Team Canada, even though the consistency wasn't amazing or anything, when he was on his game, Team Canada was almost unstoppable and obviously ended up winning gold. And I think a big reason because of that was Pinelli providing some great middle six offense and, again, being a huge part center-wise of that Team Canada team. But now officially getting on to the fifth riser at this year's World Juniors, we're going to continue again with the Team Canada representation and go to a player that we all knew was amazing going into this tournament, and I think people are somehow surprised that he's amazing in this tournament. You could intertwine this guy, you could interchange him with Shane Wrights. They were both absolutely brilliant. But in terms of the most impressive players of this year's World Juniors, it's hard to find many players more impressive than Connor Bedard. Connor Bedard was as advertised at this year's World Juniors. I think started off really solid and had some great play driving results, but the points really started to come in the past few games when Canada really needed him to step up. He ended up getting 7 goals, 7 assists, 14 points in 7 games played, tying Connor McDavid's U18 record for a U16 player in the U18s, which was absolutely amazing, and he definitely deserved to be up there in that company. He was brilliant throughout the whole tournament, was one of the best players, not just on Team Canada, but the entire NHL. And again, he doesn't turn 16 until July. He's still 15 years old and doing what he's doing against 18-year-olds, which is pretty much what he was doing in the WHL too. Again, I want to stress this enough. Connor Bedard is 15 years old. 15 years old. I started this YouTube channel at 14. And Connor Bedard is 15 doing amazing things. Anyways, I'm going to move on because I could ramble on about Connor Bedard any day, and I'll probably make a video about him eventually. But we're now going to move on to the 6th riser at this year's World Juniors and go on to another player that was as good as advertised and just absolutely killed it. Ended up winning to MVP of this year's World Juniors, leading the World Juniors in points as well, and definitely deserved to get a medal in this year's tournament. We're now going to move on to Team Russia's superstar, Matvei Michkov. Now, I am so excited for the 2023 draft. You guys don't even know. And that's even after the 2022 draft, which could be one of the best top-end drafts we've ever seen. But Matvei Michkov and Connor Bedard are going to provide a lot of entertainment for a very long time. And I'm going to be honest, are the 2 next faces of the NHL. Matvei Michkov, though, 12 goals in 7 games played, 16 points. Michkov made absolute mincemeat of every single defense he faced. I think Michkov is a guy, though, that in terms of generational goal scorers is probably one of, if not the best we've seen since Matthews and Alex Ovechkin. He's at that type of level with what he's been able to do in the NHL and what he'll be able to do at the KHL level. And even though he is a little bit older than Connor Bedard, he's 16 years old and led the World Juniors in points, 12 goals in 7 games played. He is the real deal and continues to show people that he is the real deal. But now we're going to go away from players that are going to be top 2 picks anyways and go on to a player that's relatively unknown in terms of the draft class this year that I thought got some major hype as he should have. We're now going to move to an interesting defensive prospect coming from Belarus and go on to one of my favorites in this draft class in Dmitry Kuzmin. Now, Dmitry Kuzmin for this draft has so much potential, I think. He's been playing in the main Belarus league and has put up some really good point totals as a D-man. But Kuzmin is one of the most exciting players of this draft. Pulled off the Michigan in the World Juniors, and he's pulled off 3 Michigans this year as a defenseman. That's how cool of a player Dmitry Kuzmin is, and he showed that for Belarus throughout the year. But in the World Juniors, he was absolutely stupendous in really both categories. I mean, he's a super fun defenseman, but in terms of the raw talent defensively, also showed pretty well. I don't think he had a bad game in the tournament, and playing for Belarus, having that pressure, being that #1 guy, Kuzmin absolutely rose to the occasion and could be one of the best legends from this 2021 NHL draft. Could be a guy, though, that I could see be going in the early rounds, and a guy that I see a team taking a big swing on and betting on that amazing potential. And even though that's the last riser I'm going to talk about, there's so many other players that I think deserve honorable mentions. I mean, Shane Wright was absolutely amazing, and it's not even his draft year yet. It's next year, and he'll be in the U18s doing absolutely amazing things there too as well. And going at other players on Team Canada, Brant Clark was amazing. Connor Roulette definitely impressed me, especially early on in the tournament. Players like Wyatt Johnson, I thought definitely had a great depth role. On Team Finland, Samu Tuminala had a great tournament, and guys like Ville Kuvinen, who I've been a pretty big fan of, also showed well, I thought. And even other players, I mean, Nikita Chibrikov, Danil Yurov on Team Russia, same thing with Fedor, Svechkov, and Prokhor Poltavov, who was amazing in terms of a great grindy and insertive role on Russia. And again, other players, Isaac Rosen I thought was great. Lane Hudson was a lone bright spot on Team USA. Just a lot that was a great young talent in this year's World Juniors that I thought was really impressive as well. Just a great tournament overall, of course, coming from Texas, and And of course, congratulations to Team Canada on winning gold as a USA fan. I know I'm wearing a Canada jersey, but let me be for now. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and hit that notification bell. Comment down below all your thoughts. What do you agree and disagree with my rising and falling picks? And who do you see as the biggest risers and the biggest fallers from this year's World Juniors? Let me know all your thoughts, and of course your thoughts on who you watched and which players you were impressed by. Make sure you share this video with your friends. Get the risers and fallers out there, and click on this card for all of my hockey prospect content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Thanks so much for being an absolute beauty, and I'll see you in the next video or stream. Goodbye.